All right, good morning, everybody. It's so good to be here with you. If you're the type that likes following like a Bible or something, we're going to be in the book of Proverbs. But if not, don't worry about that. We've created some really easy to follow along with slides that you'll find easier probably that way. It's always good to be here with my New Hope family in Toowoomba. I look forward to the entire weekend. I tell you, if you put a couple hours aside over the next 4 days to explore some of the things we're going to deal with, it will change your life. And what will normally happen is not these huge radical shifts, but normally life changes with little 2-degree shifts that we stick to over a long period of time. And if we stick to it, sometimes if we go for the real radical shift, it just is overwhelming. It's like, oh, I can't do that. But actually the wise way to change our life is actually more commit to a 2-degree shift and stick to that over 5 years. And if you make a 2-degree shift and stick to it over, in one day, it doesn't make that big of a difference. But a 2-degree shift stuck to over 5 years makes a massive difference. And so over the next 4 days, we're going to explore all kinds of different stuff. I've got an idea I want to share with you today. After this is over, outside there to the right, we do have our resource table set up. The reason we do that is we use that to take care of the poor and the afflicted and keep our commitments to orphanages in China that look after children with mental disabilities, as well as a rescue home in Cape Town that gets girls out of sex trafficking, off drugs, high school educated, and job trained, so we can do our part to break the cycle of poverty in the Cape Flats. So that's all out there. It'll be in USB and audio and video will be out there to help you with that. So for our men's mornings, I looked at my database, and what I tend to do is I stick with the wisdom literature. And the reason I do that is because wisdom literature cuts across however you grew up, right? So if you grew up in this tradition, the wisdom literature is still wisdom. If this is your first time ever stepping foot into a church and you came for the breakfast sandwich and you're like, that's fine. So the wisdom literature will still help your life. If you've been following Jesus for ever and ever and ever, it's sometimes to step back into the wisdom literature and go, wait a minute, what I believe is not necessarily as important as how I believe what I believe it and what it produces in my life. So I'm going to start with an observation from Paul, who writes this in 1 Corinthians 12. There are different kinds of spirits, but the same Spirit distributes them. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but in all of them and in everyone, it is the same God at work. A revolutionary concept in the first century that there wasn't an existent God sitting above the broken story, choosing sides, treating men better than women, treating white people better than black people, treating rich people better. No. There was one Spirit holding the whole thing together. And if that's the case, that changes everything in terms of how we treat each other. It also changes everything in terms of how we think about hierarchy and rank and who's more important and who's less important. What Paul's affirming is whatever your role is in God's work changing the world is just as important as somebody else's. He continues on, now to each one the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good. In other words, Paul affirmed this thing about how Jesus looked at things. And if this is your first time being exposed to something Christian, let me take just one quick second and define what a Christian is and what a Christian is not. Okay, a Christian is not an expert in things like health, politics, sex, climate. That's not what a Christian is. And so if you've been inundated on the internet with people thinking, just because we're Christians, we know what we're talking about around this, that is baloney, right? Christians are people who simply wake up every day being intentional about seeing the world how Jesus saw the world, seeing God how Jesus saw God, and applying Scripture how Jesus applied Scripture. And so one of the ways that Jesus saw the world, and Paul, because he was impacted by Jesus, saw the world, was that we should all wake up every day considering the other person better than ourselves, and therefore we live for the common good, not for just policies that enrich our lives, right? And so this is part of it. So let me just, if you're a linear thinker, I did this for you. Here we go. Number one, God loves the world and is at work repairing it through people. that God loves the world, is at work repairing it through people. I like to think of it, I've told this illustration before, but it's worth repeating because people don't remember you a year apart. It's sort of like a broken art picture, right? So if a 4-year-old, if you're a dad and your 4-year-old drew you a picture and said, Daddy, I drew you a picture, it's likely going to be terrible, right? Unless she is incredibly gifted, right? It's likely going to be terrible. But you wouldn't criticize her broken picture. You wouldn't go, this is awful, come back when you learn how to draw, right? You wouldn't do that. I've been in lots of people's homes with frankly terrible art on refrigerators held there by magnets, right? Why? Is it because the artwork is so pristine? No, it's because of who drew it. But the picture is broken in terms of the artwork, and if so she asked you to help her with the picture, you wouldn't throw it away, draw a perfect picture, and say, come back when you learn how to do this. You would engage the broken picture with her in order to make a better story. That is what Jesus was up to. He did not come into the broken story of the world to condemn it or throw it away or criticize it or banish it or shame it. He came into the broken story of the world in order to make a better story. Number 2, to do that, God is equipping people with gifts to accomplish his purpose. Number 3, to participate in our role in that plan or reject the possibility for our role in his plan is our choice. I love the way Desmond Tutu says it. He says, for whatever reason, inexplicably, God has always chosen to use a human vessel to accomplish his purpose. The question is what will your response be to that offer? Now, here's the key question for the morning, and this is what I want us to wrestle with, and my goal is to be a massive encouragement. When you walk out of here, I want you to think, man, I am encouraged, and I can accomplish more than I ever thought I could accomplish when I walked in, and that is this. Here's the key question. If God is at work repairing the world through people given gifts from him to accomplish his purpose, what could possibly stop it? And I think there's 2 possible answers to that. One answer is if God is readily, steadily, and predictably repairing the broken story to make a better narrative, one of the things that stops it is when people get stuck in the repairing of that better story and we think we're done. Okay, so God is done. This is it. This is the final, this is the culmination of the ages. This is when God stops repairing the broken story and we get stuck and we hold on to a former broken picture when God is trying to move it to a better version of that story. That is a philosophical thing about how we approach the world. That's too deep of a thing to deal with today, other than to say, if we are tempted to hold on to this version of the story, we might be the people resisting God's move to a better version of the story. But the second option is something that the wisdom literature calls sloth. That people who resist the urgency to participate with what God is doing in the world. Now, words don't matter. They don't. How we picture words working matters. So if I say the word sloth's not a common word today, but if I was to say the word sloth, instantly certain images come to our mind. Maybe it was the Ice Age movie with Sid the Sloth, right? And so he's always moving slow. He's quite irritating because he's always tired. He's pretty useless. Gives his whole life to chase one acorn. That's sort of all that gets him. Like it's that kind. You have that kind of picture of laziness, and so then instantly, if we have that picture, we go, okay, I'm going to dismiss myself from wrestling with this because I'm not a lazy person. I work 60 hours a week. But in the wisdom literature, sloth had nothing to do with work ethic. Sloth had to do with a posture of our heart towards accomplishing what God had us to accomplish. So there's a way you can work 60 hours a week and still have sloth in our heart because we're just working so that we can make ends meet, so we can provide for our family. But that still doesn't posture our heart towards the infinite possibilities God might have for us, right? And so I'm going to read. Everything I'm going to read right now is from the wisdom literature in Proverbs, all right? So this is Solomon talking about how wisdom works in operation in the world. This is Proverbs chapter 26, 13. A sluggard or a sloth says, there's a lion in the road, a fierce lion roaming the streets. In other words, a slothful person can always think of the most ridiculous reason not to go outside and accomplish something. Like, what if there's a lion out there? As a door turns on its hinges, so a sluggard turns on his bed, which is this slow, creaky sort of, right? It's a pretty good image. Here's the next one. A sluggard buries his hand in the dish, and then he's too lazy to bring it back to his mouth. A sluggard is wiser in his own eyes than 7 people who answer discreetly. The wisdom character has more to say about this. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. I have no commander or no ruler or overseer, yet it stores its provision in summer and gathers its food in harvest. How long will you lie there, you sluggard? Will you get up from your sleep? A little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a thief, and scarcity like an armed man. Proverbs 24, I went past the field of a sluggard, past the vineyard of someone who has no sense. There were thorns coming up everywhere. The ground was covered with weeds, and the stone wall was in ruins. In other words, a sluggard is not proactive. He waits till it gets overrun until he acts. I love this one, Proverbs 10:26. As vinegar to the teeth and smoke to the eyes, so are sluggards to those who send them. In other words, they're irritating. That it's not the people who are overtly engaged in evil behavior that irritate us. Often the people who irritate us the most are the people who don't take seriously the mission at hand, the job at hand. And so they're like vinegar to the teeth and smoke to the eyes. Now, let's create an image of what we're talking about, because the word matters less than how someone pictures that word working. In Hebrew, the word is atzel, which is in pictures. Remember, ancient Hebrew is all pictures. So every word is a comic strip. In pictures, it's the authority of what lures me is missing. There's this fish hook with bait on it, and it's missing. In other words, the root word of the etymology of the word sloth is you wake up in the morning and nothing gets you going. Like you wake up in the morning and you might go work 60 hours a week. You actually might do well at your job, but that thing in your heart that gets your heart pumping that says, hey, this is why I'm alive today. God has given me a gift of 24 hours of his breath, and I am alive to do something meaningful. That gets missing, and when that gets missing, it starts to taint how we go to work. It starts to taint how we husband. It starts to taint how we father. It starts to taint everything else. It becomes ubiquitous. That attitude, that posture of the heart gets in there and says, wait a minute, nothing is actually getting me going. In some cases, it turns into full-blown depression. But at the end of the day, what it is there's this thing where we haven't found the why. Like we know what we're doing, but we really don't have any idea why we're doing what we're doing. And so we live our life maybe even working quite hard, but then terrified of death, right? So to be terrified of death is a misnomer. Like you can't have a fear of death, because fear by definition means there's an anticipation of what might happen. I don't want to be Johnny Raincloud here today, but we're all going to die, okay? Nobody's going to escape that. And I'm going to prophesy to you right now, like at some point that's going to get you, right? It's going to get all of us. It's just a part of the story. Fear of death is not really fear of death. Fear of death is fear of the day, fear that there might be a day come one day that I can't do what I'm actually meant to do. And so the way to overcome the fear of death is to wake up today doing everything that makes your heart beat fast that you are meant to do. You can overcome these sorts of things. Think about the parable of the talents, where Jesus talks about how he sees the world, and he lists these people that irritate him. But when he goes on to talk about why they irritate him, think about all the debauchery and terror and horrible things going on in the Roman Empire. But when Jesus talked about the people who irritate him, they weren't the people necessarily engaging in overt evil. They were the people not engaging at all in anything. He says, you wicked and slothful servant. Now, to a Hebrew mind, sloth is a posture of the heart. It's sort of like this. There's certain words we avoid, and you're going to hear a bit about this in other talks this week, but it's going to bear repeating. There's certain words we avoid because of the connotations of them. So if I was to say holy, so holiness, if I said, I want to talk to you today about holiness, most of you would be like, look, you're trying to kill a party here? Like holiness, who wants to talk about that? But that's because our primary image of holiness has to do with being perfect, not making a mistake, a list of things you don't do. But holiness in its etymology was being trusted by God with his breath. That God has set you apart by trusting you with his life-sustaining breath. And anything that God trusts with his breath is holy. And so God has trusted you. Essentially, God has trusted you with 24 hours of his breath today. What are you going to do about it? How are you going to use it? Are you going to use it in a way that hallows the gift of that breath? Or are we going to treat that gift of breath as if it's common? That word would be profanity. Profanity is to treat something that is sacred as if it is common. There's two ways to live your life. The Jewish people said it this way. The rabbis said it this way. You can hallow the name, or you can profane the name. Remember in Jesus' Lord's Prayer, he says, my Father who's in the air that I breathe, hallowed be your name. In other words, I want to live my life every day honoring the 24 hours of breath you've given me and never treating it as if it is something that is common. Essentially, holiness is God has trusted you with his breath today. What are you going to do about it? But this is how words work. Words get on container ships and go through time. They pick up metaphors, figures of speech. Some people win wars. Some people lose wars. With the people who lose wars, those words become swear words. The people who win the wars, those words become the clean words. That's how swear words work, right? And so they pick up different connotations and figures of speech and metaphors and images. So by 1950, in the South in America, holiness was don't smoke, don't drink, don't go to bad movies, right? But in the South, you could hate black people. That was okay, right? Which was such a strange sort of way. You could go to hell for looking at a bottle of wine, but it was fine to hate people. What a weird sort of system. And how do you take something so profound as God has trusted you with his breath today, what are you going to do about it? And dumb it down to a list of things you don't do. Actually honoring the gift of God's breath has everything to do with what we engage in and nothing to do with what we don't do. It's a matter of what we say yes to. See, let's say it this way, next slide. There's something called the glory of God, which is what we're all living for. But the word is kabod, which is a market term for weight. It's let's say it this way, next slide. So the things in life that weigh the most normally can't be weighed. Breath, can't really weigh breath. Can't weigh the gift of life. Like, have you ever had something scare your health? Like, and it was sudden. It wasn't something that built up over time. It was like you were fine and then you weren't, right? And so you go to the doctor and you're expecting the doctor to go, hey, just sort of see this through. There's not really big deal. But then the doctor puts you through a series of tests and then the doctor goes, no, there's a problem here, right? And it's scary. And then before you know it, people are shoving you in big machines, checking out. You realize laying in a big machine, taking a picture of stuff that a doctor, not your cousin Leon on YouTube, a doctor says there's a potential problem here, and we're going to take a picture of the inside of you to see what's causing that problem. If you've ever had a problem, if you ever had you thought you were fine, then you had a heart attack or whatever. If you think about those moments, all the things we think are important are not. In that one moment, you would write a check for everything you have to know you're okay. You would. So what happens is we realize in those moments that the things we give weight to actually have less weight than the things you can't weigh. Things like breath and life, health, love. What does love weigh? What does peace in your heart weigh? What does mercy weigh? All these things can't be weighed. Let's say it this way too. In rabbinical literature, sloth is about a posture of response to the life God is offering us. You can work 60 hours a week and still not be alive to the infinite possibilities that God has given us just by giving us 24 hours gift of his breath, a week gift of his breath. All of us have used the last week of gift of God's breath in either a way that hallows it or profanes it. And it doesn't have anything to do with what we don't do. It has everything to do with what we engage in, saying yes every day to honor that. Sometimes the answer is not to work harder. Is to posture our heart in a different direction. I would say this, number 3, sloth is not Sabbath rest. So this isn't an encouragement to just go hard every single day, never recreate, never rest, never have bound. No. No, actually, in the same wisdom literature, it talks about the importance of mastering the art of giving and receiving. That you have to master the art of receiving or you'll die. But if you master the art of receiving without mastering the art of giving, that is problematic as well. That success in life is mastering the art of work and rest. It's sort of like music that way. Like music is made up of notes and rests, right? And so if you ever heard a song where there's too many notes, it's hard to listen to. It's too busy. This is why I'm not mad at anybody. If you're into grunge rock, God bless you. I hope you get a lot out of it. But grunge rock to me just sounds like it's too irritating. And the reason is there's too many notes and too little time with no rest, right? So it sort of sounds chaotic, like like it's that, and you're going, what is going on? This is irritating to my soul. But also music that takes too long to get where it's going, it's equally irritating. So if music has too much rests, it's right. If music has not enough rest, it's irritating. The music that speaks to our heart the most are songs that master the art of when to be on and when to be off, right? That knowing when to be on and when to be off. And you'll see this in church, right? Like, or any kind of concert or something. There's something called a crash bang. A crash bang is the moment between fast songs where everything is, right? And it's pretty cool for 8 seconds, right? But if you did a crash bang for a minute, it would start to irritate the soul. Why? Because music is notes and rest. Can you imagine a musician that just ignored the rest? That would be weird. Or can you imagine a musician that ignored the notes and put rest in? And so really a lot of what we call depression, and look, depression is real, and if you struggle with depression, you should seek mental health help and a doctor's help. But a lot of what we call depression is simply there's not enough music in our song, right? There's not enough notes going on. We're too bored. We're sitting around watching. Have you ever caught yourself, and no indictment, and please don't say it loud, but have you ever caught yourself wasting, before you knew it, you wasted 2 hours watching 2-minute videos about cats or something, and you're like, what did I just do? How was that an appropriate use of God's breath on my life? At the same time, if we have not enough rest, it can put our life out of rhythm. Sometimes we're thinking, what did I do wrong? But actually, what we should be asking is my life out of rhythm? Are the notes right, but the rhythm is off? Let's say it this way. Next slide. Sloth is saying no to the endless possibilities and potentials of the life God has given you. It's not about doing something wrong or right. It's about not having that thing drive you every day. Hey, it's about waking up, not being passionate about the gift of God's breath today. And here's the thing, things will overtake our mind. Like, you're going to wake up every day thinking something. You may as well wake up every day taking a deep breath and going, 24 hours, God has given me a gift of life and breath. I have a holy opportunity to make the best of it. And I'm telling you, if you wake up every day thinking that is far more empowering than waking up thinking about a problem or waking up. This is wisdom's invitation to live on a higher plane. Now, the imagery around God's breath is something called the Spirit of God. The word spirit, again, if we picture something toxic like spirit, right? The word spirit in Greek and Hebrew just means breath. It's this, they would use words like, hey, they're spirited. What does that mean? It means they have a lot of breath, right? Like they have a lot of life going on. And so what they thought was, hang on, the breath of God that was present at creation, what did it do? It engaged the broken story and brought order out of disorder to make a better narrative. That same Spirit was present in Christ, was present in resurrection, that this thing conquered death, that this gift of breath is never tiring of engaging broken stories to make a better narrative, even if that broken story is death. That was a big thing. What does that mean? It means whatever God has called you to, whatever it is, if it's not more hopeless than death, you got a shot at it, right? So somebody, and they weren't being mean. I want to be clear. They were just curious. They said, Shane, you do this thing in China. I'm like, yeah, I do. He said, can you tell me why? I said, yes, because people matter, and particularly marginalized people who can do nothing in return or help themselves. They matter a lot. And my role is to be the presence of resurrection in those children's lives. Like, your tomorrow is not a repeat of your yesterday because I just walked in your life, right? And I get great joy. I wake up in the morning. This is the thing that gets me going. I just flew from Mackay, drove to Pittsworth, then to Gundawindi, then to Dalby, then to here. Now I'm here. Why would I do all that? Because I'm waking up every day trying to to be moved by this 24-hour gift of life today. Why do I do that? And they had a follow-up question. They said, yeah, but you can't make a permanent difference. At the end of the day, they're still going to be mentally handicapped. At the end of the day, they weren't being mean. They were trying to understand the psychology of why engage in something you can't totally fix. And my thought around that is that however hopeless that looks, if it's not as hopeless as death, then we are called by the Spirit to engage that. So think about it for a second. What has God called you to? Maybe he's called you to maybe your calling today to honor the gift of breath is just be the best dad you could be today to your children because it's Saturday and they haven't seen you all week really and you really haven't been present. Maybe the gift of breath can be found in you today by being fully present with your children instead of being at work somewhere in your head. You're playing Legos with them, but in your head you're saying, maybe that's it. Maybe it's being a good husband. Maybe there's a mission somewhere else that you say, hey, I want to make those people's lives better. And my encouragement to you today is simply this. If what God has called you to is not as hopeless as death, then the Spirit that overcame the primordial chaos before creation and overcame death is the same Spirit you've been gifted with today. So let's say it this way. Sloth is when you refuse to use the gift God has given you to breathe life into the world around you. And you can have good work ethic and still have a posture that doesn't do that. Number two, in order to be effective at using the gifts for the common good, we must master the art of work and rest. So why would people ever reject that? This sounds like an awesome sort of thing. Like, that would be a great life. Waking up every day, choosing to hallow the gift of God's breath today. Why wouldn't you do this? Well, the wisdom literature gives us a clue. I see 5 things in Proverbs about why you would resist that or why any of us would. Number 1 is overinflated ego. In one of the scriptures we read, it says, a sluggard is wiser in his own eyes than 7 people who answer discreetly. In other words, some people resist the infinite possibilities God has for them because it doesn't build them up. There's something about living for the common good that doesn't allow them to be exalted. There's this overinflated ego. And Jesus, if Christianity is about how Jesus saw the world, the one thing you keep over and over and over again with Jesus is, if you really want to find life, you're going to find life in losing your life for somebody else. This is people who truly are the happiest are the ones living every day for somebody else. And until we deal with ego, that's not going to happen. The second reason is we worry about things not going according to plan. So we've all done this, right? We have this opportunity and everything in us initially goes, yes, yes. I want to posture my heart to the yes response to that. But then it doesn't take very long before we're laying on our bed and we can't quite fall asleep and we're thinking of all the things that possibly could go wrong with that. And some of us are more prone to catastrophize than others, right? And I'm one of those people. I can get over it pretty quick, but if I see a potential something going wrong, I can play that thing out in my head to the nth degree. And I don't think I'm the only one, right? And so in the wisdom literature, the sluggard is like, hey, there's this opportunity, but what if there's a lion outside? Which I think is a pretty hyperbolic way of picking the most remote possibility and going, what if that happens, you know? In other words, the wisdom literature says if you lay around thinking of all the reasons you can't do something, you might find yourself at the end of your life realizing you never did anything. Number 3, we reject the discipline to plan. The wisdom literature says if you want to learn, if you're a sluggard or a slothful person, and what that means is that your posture of your heart is to the no response instead of the yes response. One of the lessons we can learn is go to the ant and realize the importance of planning ahead. I mean, the truth of it is, whether it's finances or whether it's health, it's always best to be out in front of the crisis instead of responding to the crisis. Like, look, if you need to lose 5 kilos, lose 5 kilos today because it's much easier to lose 5 kilos than to wait till you need to lose 40 kilos. It's just a whole lot better. It's just a whole lot easier. Hey, if you're seeing a financial trend in the downward direction, adjust now. It's a whole lot better to solve a $3,000 problem than to solve a $30,000 problem, because the truth of it is life can get away with us pretty quickly. I was talking to a friend of mine just today about the role of planning and how I just turned 46 and how it hit me. I'm more than halfway between 30 and 60, right? Now when I was 25, 60 sounded like flippin' ancient, but now I'm 46 and I'm like closer to that than I am 30. And so if you didn't plan for things like SUPA and putting money away and securing your future, it's a whole lot easier to plan with a financial issue with years to go than it is to try to panic with only a few years to see that he says, hey, part of what helps us with the yes response is making sure we plan so that the external stress doesn't overtake us. Number 4, we feel the opportunity will cost too much. Sometimes we look at something we know God's called us to do, and we think about what it'll cost us relationally or financially or emotionally, and we're like, you know what? I'm not against God, but I am going to posture myself in the no response to that because, frankly, the cost is just too much. Which brings me to Jesus. Christianity is all about how Jesus lived his life and being intentional about seeing the world, seeing God, and applying Scripture that way. And here's one thing you can say, whether you get Christianity, you don't, whether you're like, I'm not really about religion. Here's the one thing that you can't deny about Jesus, and that is this: Jesus used all he had to submit to the Father's plan. Jesus was the antithesis of sloth. Jesus' posture in his heart, even at moments where he wasn't real excited about it, he's like, my posture in my heart, I have the gift of God's breath right now on me, and I will live with the yes response. And he surrendered all that he had to the Father's plan. This is from the book of Matthew. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hand of the elders, the chief priests, teachers of the law, and he must be killed and be raised on the third day. So Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Never, Lord, this shall never happen to you. So there's always a voice that is bent to the no response, but the yes response is where life is. Jesus turned and said to him, get behind me, Satan. It's a pretty stinging sort of thing to say to somebody. You're a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human. In other words, I get why you don't want me to go through this, but if you understood what God had for me to do, you would be with me in it, not trying to talk me out of it. Then Jesus said to his disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it. Whoever will lose their life for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world and forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? In other words, how much is honoring the gift of God's breath and doing what he's called us to do and being bent toward the yes response, how much is that worth for soul health? Because the no response might gain you something over here, but at the end of the day, there's no life in it. It's not even that it's wrong. It's just there's no life in it. Let's say it this way: there's no shortcut to any place worth going. That being bent to the yes response sometimes costs us stuff. I would say one other reason that we avoid the yes response is we're afraid of criticism. If we do that, somebody's going to criticize me. And here's the truth: you'll never do anything meaningful where there's not one person coming against you. Who was it, Winston Churchill, or was it John F. Kennedy? One of them said, 20% of the people are against everything all the time. And it's just true. Why? Because there are people bent to the no response. And when they're confronted by somebody bent to the yes response, they'd rather criticize from the stands than get in the field and play the game. And I'd rather make infinite mistakes in the field playing the game with the yes response than sitting up as an anonymous observer criticizing somebody. Here's the thing: when you get criticized, here's the way to get over it. Don't argue. Don't defend yourself. Don't fuel it with fire. Just take a deep breath and realize they've criticized me. And I'm still here. I'm still going. And I'm still bent to the yes response. And eventually, that loses its power. Now, good sermons are not meant to be agreed with or disagreed with. They're meant to be wrestled with for application. So I want to leave us with a few questions about the posture of our heart. Number one, are we willing to accept the opportunity to partner with God to change the world? I would actually change one word about that question, to change our world. The idea of we could change the whole world, that's, I don't know. I think if everybody changes their own world and is bent to the yes response, then by proxy, the whole world does get changed. But our job is to change our world, our family, our business, our neighborhood, our community, to spend 100% of our energy doing good in our world and zero energy on foolish controversies or quarrels about the law, as Paul instructed Titus about how he and Jesus saw the world. This is what we're meant to do. Are we willing to accept that and bend our heart to the yes response? Number two, of the obstacles we spoke of, which is the biggest issue? What's holding us back? I want you to wrestle with that question. What has been holding me back from bending my heart to the yes response instead of staying in the no response? Is it ego? Is it criticism? Is it worry about things not going to plan? Let me help you with that one. Things aren't going to go to plan. Don't worry about it. Nothing ever goes how it's supposed to go. Part of the excitement in life is adjusting to curveballs when they come. Ego, worry, planning, maybe that's our biggest obstacle. Cost or criticism. Of the biggest obstacles, which is the biggest issue for you? Number three, is there any possibility that you know God has called you to, but up until now you've rejected it? You haven't rejected God. Matter of fact, you're a big Jesus fan. Like, you're all in with Jesus. Like, it's fine. But underneath that, there's this thing, this gift of God's breath that's saying, wake up every day alive inside to do this. But up until now, you've resisted it. And I don't know why that would be, but I would challenge you. Just if you think I'm saying, hey, make a life decision right now. It's going to be permanent for the rest of your life. That could be daunting. Maybe we could talk about it in terms of 30-day increments. Like, hey, this thing that I know gets my heart beating fast, for the next 30 days, I'm going to wake up every day in the yes response towards that part of God's plan. What we might find is that there's actually life there. That what we were afraid of had less sting than the life we were missing being afraid of it. Maybe we'll find that. So my encouragement to you guys and to myself, is that, hang on, today, 24 hours of God's breath. What are you going to do about it? May we have the posture to the yes instead of the bent to the no. And by faith, may we find life in that. So Jesus, give us the courage to see things different, the irresistible urge to respond to what we see. May we live life bent to the yes response and never the no response. Thank you for the gift, the divine, holy opportunity to be alive today, breathing your air. May we live in a way that honors that. Amen. Thanks for letting me be your guest, guys. Grace and peace.